We begin the next session for the day. The moderator for the session is going to be none other than Mr. Vinoo Mathur, the president of the Rail Enthusiast Society. A career railwayman by profession, Mr. Vinoo Mathur, however, has always been a very keen rail enthusiast, a researcher of tremendous merit, a gentleman of great knowledge and learning. His erudition has actually resulted in some interesting books, the most popular of which has been Bridges, Buildings and Black Beauties, a masterpiece of a book that was researched over an extended period of time and can still, if you're very lucky, you could still get your copies, I think, from the National Rail Museum. I will not get in your way, and let me hand over to Mr. Vinoo Mathur for the next session of the day.
Thank you, Mayank. It is my pleasure to welcome Michael Whitehouse for the next session. Michael is the chairman of Vintage Trains Charitable Trust based in Birmingham. He has been a pioneer in promoting heritage special express steam train operation in the United Kingdom. I mean, when I say pioneer, he's been there for over 50 years, over half a century. Working on this, now the organization has its own locomotives, trains, workshops and operating depots. Managing such a massive operation on a sustainable business must be a very great challenge. And what we look forward in this session is how did he go about it? How did he get this achievement? How did they expand the system? Because it is not just one special train running somewhere. It is a fairly large scale operation. His interest in this field started out as a young man when he was on the Festinaug Railway working on locomotives. And from then on, he developed this passion and has pursued it and has progressively become the chairman of Vintage Train Charitable Trust. We look forward to the session. I think there is a lot of learning for us in India in this area. I now leave it to Michael to kindly make it. Michael, you need to unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself. Yes.
Hello. Yes, morning. Thank you for allowing me to unmute myself. I'm very pleased to meet you, Vinoo, and looking forward to meeting everybody else on the screen over the time I'm here. So thank you very much. So I now got to do the next technical point of sharing my screen. So we'll do that straight away and see whether we can get the PowerPoint on. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Good. So good morning, everybody. I am indeed chairman of Vintage Trains Charitable Trust. It's a registered educational charity in England, and one maybe the only, but one of the very few charities in the world which have an operating license to run express steam trains on the main line. It's extremely exciting, very rewarding, and as Vinoo has said, very hard work. So this is the story of our journey. It's a largely personal story because my father was one of the world pioneers after the Second World War in 1950 to start this journey. So I thought we would tell you how we built it up over a period of 70 years from 1950 until today. Frankly, it's largely been done by chance at some occasions, luck, very hard work, meeting and making some very good friends along the way, perseverance, and avoiding failure. So it's quite tricky, and it will always remain to be so, because You know, we're running equipment that's 80 years old on the national network at probably half the speed of the very fast trains. So we'll tell the story. But Vinoo, before I go forward, can I just get some feedback? Can you hear me? Is the sound all right? Is the technicals working for everybody?
Yeah, it's perfect.
It's absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
Good. So in that case, we'll start way back in the 1950s. This is not a mainline railway, as it's a little narrow gauge railway called the Tysley Railway in Wales in the middle of 1950s, and that's my mother and my sister on the platform actually. This was the very first railway to be run by volunteers successfully. After the war, people wanted to do something useful. Nationalisation was in full swing, similar to the problems we have now with our pandemic. And this railway was on its last legs, and author Tom Rolls thought it would be nice to preserve the very last independent railway in Britain, which was in a terrible condition. And he convinced a small team of people, largely from Birmingham, some from Manchester, to join him. And they had, frankly, no concept whatsoever of what was in front of them. But over the next 10 years, by hard labour, begging money and lots of assistance, they rebuilt this railway line from one engine only capable of working 2 or 3 days a week to 5 or 6 engines running 3 trains a day in the summer. And they increased the service from something like 30,000 passengers nearly to 100,000. The luck was they were given the railway. The perseverance and difficulties was it was in really bad condition. And indeed, one of the locomotives was completely on its last legs. And they were very lucky. Again, this locomotive came from a railway only 10 miles away, which happened to be the same gauge, which was unique in the United Kingdom. So just very lucky, really. So it is to a large extent a game of chance of being in the right place at the right time, meeting the right people, but putting a lot of effort into it. So, and of course, it was at the right time because I suspect, as we're going to find now after our pandemic, after the war, there was a huge desire to go on holiday and explore. And people were taking holidays in Great Britain, perhaps a little bit more. So it was easy to get onto television in 1957, which boosted the passenger seats quite considerably. So anyway, once the railway had been set up and running, the entrepreneurs really liked a new challenge and weren't the sort of people just to keep churning the handle at doing the same thing. And they'd been involved in standard gauge mainline railways doing a television series called The Railway Roundabout for Children, which had led them to meet lots of people in senior positions on the National Railway. My father, Pat Whitehouse, and one of his best friends, Pat Garland, thought it would be rather nice if they bought a standard gauge steam engine, which was quite a big jump, really. So and they were fairly confident about this because, you know, they had my father had a building firm, and you can see here the lorry bringing one of the restored coaches, which used to be a chicken coop in a farm near Shrewsbury. So I mean, they had some skills, they had carpentry skills, building skills. Pat Garland had financial skills, and they knew a lot of people in business. So it was moving already in the early 1960s from just being a hobby into a sort of quasi business, really. In fact, I'd probably go further than that. It was moving into a lifetime passion that was really being lived 24/7, because although, you know, having a day job doing whatever they were doing, frankly, this was all time consuming. Every day, every minute of every hour was involved in building up this enterprise from frankly nothing. So in 1964, they decided they'd like to buy a standard gauge engine, and this engine was selected for them by the Western Region of British Railways. because the two Pats, Pat Collin and Pat Whitehouse, had no mechanical or engineering knowledge. So they said to the railway, we would like to buy an engine. Will you choose one for us? And knowing a few of the locomotive inspectors, Jack Hancock selected the best one of this type, a branch line engine, out of several that were in Devon and Cornwall. Perhaps I should ask you a question, but anyway, this engine was taken to Swindon Works, which was the mecca for Great Western Railway repairs. It had a light repair. A wagon of spare parts was provided together with a spare boiler, and it was given a test run down the main line to a place called Kemble, and then it was delivered to Birmingham, all for the princely sum of £750. Of course, that's not a lot of money these days, but in 1964 it was worth a bit more than that. But nevertheless, it was affordable. But what do you do with an engine when you buy it? You see, it's nice to say, of course, that we have a strategy going forward. I think we do now as Vintage Trains, because we've been doing this for 70 years. But in 1964, there wasn't any strategy. You bought an engine and then wondered where on earth you were going to put it. It wasn't the same gauge as the Tallaght Railway. It's far too big to go in the back garden. So with some friends, it went to a locomotive depot called Tysley, which you'll hear a lot more of, in southwest Birmingham, which a group of Birmingham people had got to know because they'd been running various special trains over the period of the 1950s as steam engines were disappearing in their multitude. And they used to go to Tysley depot to clean them up and paint them before the special train. And so got to know the shed master there. This depot is quite a famous one now because it's based where we base, and it's got a huge workshop. And in 1908, it was started to develop the Great Western System in South Birmingham and housed at its peak about 108 locomotives. And actually, it is now the only depot in the top 50 by engine number that remains doing its same job in the whole of the United Kingdom. But that wasn't planned, and I don't think it was even known. And the other thing that wasn't known when they bought the engine, that quite by surprise, chance and coincidence, 4555, when it was made in the 1920s, was delivered new to Tysley. So the engine had come home, and these researches have only recently come to light. So again and again, it will be a story of chance and coincidence and people getting to know and meeting each other. And I think in the day of the internet, actually, it's worth remembering that personal relationships, frankly, mean everything, whether they're families, friends, or business. And that's certainly been the success part of our story in meeting so many lovely people who have helped us along this journey. So having got this engine, there was obviously a desire to use it, and various societies chartered it and ran special excursions. And of course, rather like a model railway, once you have one engine, it gets a bit possessive, and more friends join in, and more engines are collected. So here we see two more engines, the branch line engines, both of them, Great Western ones again, which had been repainted by my father's family firm. You can see my father in the middle of the picture with his hands in his pockets, with a cap on, with the overalls. And the society, Stevenson Locomotive Society, its organizer, Arthur Camwell, is pointing at him with his raincoat. So they're having some discussion. All Dad was really interested on, it was travelling on the locomotive as it was moving along. And this is on the Midland Main Line from Birmingham to Bristol, believe it or not. So British Railways are running this train for enthusiasts with branch line engines on a mainline railway in 1964 and 65. So already in the short few moments, we've advanced from not knowing what on earth we're doing in being given a narrow gauge railway, to encouraging British Railways, the state railway, to run private locomotives on special trains on the main line, without really even thinking about it, because when steam locomotives were disappearing from British Railways, there was a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of sadness that they were going. So everyone was happy to have, if you like, a last fling. Nobody really knew in 1965 what was going to happen. There were no plans to establish large workshops and run on the main line. People hadn't got that far because steam was still running on the main line for a further 4 or 5 years. So what happened then, they found a branch line in Devon to run these locomotives on, and set up a public company, which was immediately successful, called the Dart Valley Railway, which carried 60,000 people in its first year. And that found a home for the small tank engines, where they still thrive today, running services in the summer season. But then steam locomotives on British railways were fading out. And this design, the Castle class, was probably one of the most famous and successful steam locomotive types in the United Kingdom, a Great Western design. And they were coming to the end of their lives in 1964. And British Railways were convinced to run a last steam train to see whether they could get any of them to do 100 miles an hour for the last time. They just failed, but this engine did 96 miles an hour. And in its end of its days, it took the speed time record from Plymouth to Bristol, which was an amazing feat, really, and there was a demand to preserve it. But people couldn't raise the £3,000 that was required. So they came to my father and a colleague and said, would you help? And in a sort of somewhat fit of madness, my father said yes. And so Cluncastle, as this locomotive is called, became the first engine to form the Tysley collection. It was too big to run on a branch line, and because we had the relationship at Tysley, it came to live there. And interestingly, this is still a family enterprise, despite the fact we have an express engine now. And on the footplate, you'll see me at the age of 16, let out from school, and this engine's been steamed up for me to learn how to drive it in the Tysley yards in 1966, which, you know, looking back was quite unbelievable. But at the time, it just seemed to be the natural thing to do. You know, we had steam engines in the family. I wanted to drive it. It was possible, so we did so. And then my father at that time was director of a building company internationally. It had board meetings in London. And he was quite keen on his engine, of course. And so what he used to do, he used to arrange to come out on the Pullman train to Banbury, get off, walk down to the locomotive shed, and Cluncastle would have been sent down light engine to Banbury, and he would come home on the footplate of Cluncastle pulling a freight train, the empty car flats to Washford Heath in Birmingham. So here we have a national everyday freight train being hauled by a private steam locomotive just for the owner's enjoyment, which is quite incredible, really. And of course, as you can imagine, once people in head office got to hear about it, they didn't like it very much. But we're now getting towards the end of steam on the main line, and my father had got to know a chap called Gerald Fiennes, who was the general manager of the Eastern region, and the Eastern region was about to finish with steam, and he wrote to my father, and we still have the letter in the files, and he said, "Dear Pat, I think it would be very nice to have a jape, which means in English a bit of fun, before I retire, and I'm inviting you, Flying Scotsman, and another steam engine, Sir Nigel Gresley, to come and run some excursions on the Eastern region." So we had advanced in probably 12 or 18 months to having this locomotive, and here we are running on the Eastern region, a locomotive in private ownership, running on one of the fastest main lines in the United Kingdom, a series of excursions from London to Newcastle over the famous Settle-Carlisle line, without, you know, so much as a plan or a business plan or anything at all, really. And that's our friend Jim Kent, our engineer on the footplate, making sure the engine is in good enough condition to do this work. Well, this was great, wasn't it? We were storming ahead, and people were encouraging us to do more and more. But of course, this is 1967, and then steam was really coming to an end. So just before it got worse, it got better, in that Gerald Fine says, well, wouldn't you like to have one of the engines we've got on our region? And this is a London Midland Railway Scottish locomotive, Colipur, named after an Indian state, interestingly, based in Leeds, which was in service to run excursion summer trains over the Settle and Carlisle Railway. And this was selected for my father by British Railways out of all the Jubilee class locomotives. And my father bought it with some other help. So we then had two locomotives, both kept at Tysley, and we're then thinking about what to do with them. It had all been going so well up to now, of course, as I've been describing. But in 1968, British Railways withdrew steam locomotives from the national network. This is the very last train which they promoted in August 1968, and that was that. And British Railways then said, please go away. You've had some fun. We're not running steam engines anymore. So we're not really interested in you. So please take them away from our network and just go away. But, you know, having got this far with the euphoria, we didn't want to do that. So my father negotiated to stay at Tysley because the shed was closing. And we first took a 6-month license, then it was extended to a 25-year lease. Now we're on to a 99-year lease. We formed a charitable trust and raised enough money to build a workshop, which was basically a shed, and people were giving us machinery because it was all being thrown out and scrapped. So we're jumping a bit to the 1970s. So here is Colipur having some wheel repairs, and we had acquired, you know, some basic machinery for running sheds, like light engineering, to be able to do wheels, axle boxes, tubes, and things of that nature. There was still no definite plan because, you know, we didn't really think we could do rebuilds or anything like that. We were just keeping things going bit by bit and day by day as and when need arose, frankly. But, you know, it gets infectious. If you have a model railway, you always want another engine, or opportunities turn up. People turn up to help you, so that happens. This gentleman is Don Green. He was manager at Worcester Works, and he arrived to help us. You know, we got some superb equipment here doing valve boring on a castle. So, you know, we were starting to learn what it means to keep a 100-ton locomotive working on British Railways. And we had plenty of time because nobody was allowing us to run on the railway. There was no plan. In fact, the plan was that you couldn't do it. But we didn't believe that plan. And we set about persuading British Railways that they should change their mind. That's quite an undertaking, as you can imagine, asking a state railway to change its mind. But, you know, my father knew a lot of people. He knew Terry Miller, who was the chief traction and rolling stock board member at British Railways board, a very nice, quiet, sensible man who'd masterminded the introduction of the high-speed trains. And he, together with the managing director of Bournemouth Cider, who wanted to use steam engines for promotion, thought that there was a joint venture, a partnership that could be entered into with British Railways, where we could demonstrate that locomotives could be run safely and British Railways could make some money out of it. Anyway, they were persuaded after some long negotiation to give it a try. And this is King George V from the National Collection, together with Bulmer's private train, which had made a trial trip from Hereford to Tysley in Birmingham, just to see whether the operation could be run safely. And that was proved. And what really turned it was we had an open weekend at the depot. Bearing in mind, these maintenance depots are not made for public, they're made for engines and maintenance, and they're not the cleanest and tidiest places in the world. But we had an open day and we had 18,000 people in one single day come to see these locomotives. And we gave half the profits to British Railways charities. So it's a very long story, it'd take a book really, but anyway, British Railways were persuaded that they would allow a certain number of steam locomotives to run from specific depots where basically they were friends. They knew the people concerned personally, they trusted them, and British Railways helped a little bit because they still had people who knew how to keep engines going. So in 1972, they relaxed their ban, and we were fortunate, possibly because we've been doing a lot of the negotiation, to run the first train. This is the only picture we have of it. It's not the best picture, but it's a historic picture, but it's actually in the pouring rain. Unbelievably, this is the main line from London to Birmingham, and I got out of the coach to take the picture. You can't do that these days. And the carriage behind the engine is a private engineer's saloon, which we had bought, which we always took with us. And some people grumbled about that, but you know, the amount of effort and time put into running these organisations required some thank yous, and we always took people with us who had helped us. The British Railways named the coach the Gin Palace, actually, because they thought it was rather amusing. But frankly, our organisation was built in that coach by taking people along with us to show us what we were doing and listen to them and encourage them to help us. And this train in 1972 just went down to Didcot in Oxfordshire, and then King George V took it to Shrewsbury. And the movement we now know as running private engines on the main line had begun. So we had built lots of friends, and we built this new depot you can see in white. And the National Railway Museum was moving from London, and we built some friends there as well. And these two locomotives are not belonging to us, they belong to the National Railway Museum. And they had been lent to us for two purposes. We agreed to look after them and display them to the public as part of our charitable objectives until the museum was open. And the one in steam, Green Arrow, had been put back into service by Bill Harvey, an Eastern region mechanical expert, and it was brought to Tysley for its first excursions. And I have to say that we ran it to Didcot at Oxford at 80 miles an hour with 14 carriages, with great success. So we carried on building friends and widening our sphere of influence and helping other people out, because the more you give to other people, the more that they give back. And we found that the relationship with the National Railway Museum over the years has been very rewarding and mutually beneficial. So anyway, now we had a depot. We bought some spare parts, frankly. There was a scrapyard in South Wales, which was had about 100 and something engines, which were still in the process of being destroyed. But they had some duplicate examples to our castles. So the team at Tysley bought two of these to keep as spare parts. We had no concept of rebuilding boilers or anything like that. So the plan then was, insofar as there was a plan, was when something wore out, we'd take it off another locomotive by cannibalization. So this locomotive here is Defiant. It's another Castle class locomotive. And this was bought just for spare parts. But after some celebrations for the 150th anniversary of the Great Western Railway in 1985, by which time I was in the thick of organising all these special trains, I am afraid, had the crazy idea that this engine could be put back into revenue earning service, because we now knew, or we thought we knew, what to do. And my father was pretty canny with the local authorities we built up. At that time, there were job creation schemes bringing us out of recession. And we bid for and won enough money to repair this engine by public grants. And we, by repairing this engine and tidying our site up over a period of 5 years, we put 800 people who had been made redundant back into full-time employment, which is a fantastic contribution to the local economy. So not only are we running and preserving engines, we're actually helping to rebuild the West Midlands economy. This is sort of the level of effort that has to go into getting these things done. So I'm showing you this picture because in the space of 18 months, we had transformed it into this. This, believe it or not, is the same locomotive as you saw in the last picture. And on its test run, we came back from Oxford and we also touched 80 miles an hour. And this locomotive had been in a scrapyard. We still have it in the collection. It's run for some 20 years. It's done a lot of very good work in being used on driver experience courses. When members of the public, have been able to drive it under supervision, and it's run on several heritage railways and is currently being sponsored to return back to the main line. But you know, there's lots of things that you need to do apart from just showing nice, pretty pictures of steam locomotives. It is all about relationships. We had been given the money to do it, and you'll see on the front of the locomotive there's a headboard, the name of the train, 2 lamps depicting express steam train, and then a circular device just in the middle of the buffer beam. So I had thought that actually, having been given the money, we should say thank you for the people who gave it to us. So the Inner City Partnership was the job creation scheme that put these people back into work. So we thought we should say publicly thank you. And that worked well. And then I thought, actually, my father had done a lot of work for the job creation scheme. Frankly, apart from writing his books, he was living it, really. So he was managing this scheme. We had 100 people at the depot being paid by the public authority. So, you know, you just take a chance. You don't know necessarily what the answer will be. But very often, if you ask somebody for some help or you ask them to do something, they will help you. So I wrote to Buckingham Palace and said, would they like to send a member of their royal family down to see the work that my father had done? And they said, yes, they would. And they sent His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, who is between my father and me in the middle of the picture, to meet us. And we brought him from Birmingham on a special train with Cluncastle. I went to see the general manager and said, could we run this train? He said, yes, we won't charge you. And we had a very rewarding day for everybody. And met some more good friends, and Prince Charles had a good time talking to our new work people and staff. So here we are, father and son involved in this operation now with our pride and joy, Cluncastle. The headlamp on the front of the engine came off Queen Victoria's train, by the way. We'd borrowed it from the museum. And we're in Snow Hill Station in Birmingham, which had been destroyed. The track had been taken up, the station had been destroyed. And here we are in Snow Hill again. It's a momentous occasion for us because actually Cluncastle had hauled the very last steam train out of Snow Hill. And here we were back again with a royal train, not quite believing our eyes. We didn't know then that we would soon be running regular trains out of Snow Hill. You know, so we hadn't really got the strategy. We'd just keeping moving from day to day because there's so many challenges you have to overcome. We were engrossed in the day to day rather than the future. But having got this far, it was quite clear we had got a foothold and we had to develop it and think about it a bit more. You know, my father was in his 70s, I was in my 40s. I'm a lawyer, not an engineer. I befriended Bob Meanley, who was an engineer, to come to help us to develop the workshop, which he'd done willingly. And Bob, quite rightly and very well, engaged a team of young people in their 20s, seen here, and he taught them to repair one of our locomotives. So it's his son, Alistair, in the foreground, who's now our works manager, leading our engineering charge. And Bob taught these people steam engine engineering. And under his guidance, they rebuilt this locomotive, which had also come from a scrapyard called Rood Ashton Hall, a mixed traffic 2-cylinder 460. And we'd always had the dream to run trains from Birmingham to Stratford-upon-Avon because that's an international tourist destination. And British Railways had never wanted us to do that because it was too short a run. It's an hour in each direction. And we managed to do it once for a special occasion. But, you know, luck sometimes comes your way. We hadn't contemplated that privatization of the railways would arise. No one thought that would happen, but it did arise, which meant that provided you had locomotives which fitted the regulations and you had an operator, you could run your own trains. So rather madly, we decided to run a season of Shakespeare Express trains at our own revenue risk from Birmingham to Stratford without any business plan or marketing strategy, really. We just took the risk. English, Welsh and Scottish Railways, the freight company, agreed to run the trains for us. We got Ed Burkhardt, the American who bought the company, down for dinner, showed him the engine, and he said to me, he said, Michael, he said, you know, we were all young once, we all got started somehow, we all needed friends. He said, I'll run your trains for you for a year. And he did. He agreed a fee, but he never sent us a bill, which was very generous. Anyway, we got the trains running and they loaded well from the start. And we've been running them now for some 20, 25 years. Of course, you may say they're bound to be successful going to Stratford-upon-Avon because it's an international tourist destination. But these things don't just happen because you think they're a good idea. A huge amount of work, but we did get ourselves established. And this train now runs in the timetable in the summer. So we've then carried on. There was a national organisation, an umbrella called the Steam Locomotive Operators Association, set up to negotiate with British Railways, and they allowed various trains to run over particular routes. This is our Indian named engine, Kolhapur, running over the very famous Settle and Carlisle Railway, well away from home. Very successful trip. We had to take the engine back over its original route, and of course we had to repaint it in its original colours of LMS red. So we've now go far and wide, not just around Birmingham, but we're going right up into the north of England on our trains. So there's so many things I could tell you, of course, but time moves on. So we're moving towards things which get very difficult now because we're well into the time when these locomotives should have been destroyed in scrapyards. The people who were involved with steam railways have retired. The railways are getting faster, busier, and steam engines, you know, really getting quite tricky. But there were plenty more around. There's plenty of other people doing these things. There were several other depots doing the same as we were by now. So we're not alone. So we had some good friends to help persuade the national authorities that these things are possible. But in the days of privatization, you're on your own. So we had to really put a lot of effort into it. Anyway, the engineering carried on. This is Earl of Mount Edgecombe. It's a twin to Clun Castle, and we acquired this from a scrapyard. You can see in the box in the top left, the locomotive in the state we acquired it. And over 10 years, we completely rebuilt it. And this engine has now done some non-stop runs from London to Bristol, to Cheltenham to London, and over the Devon banks. And it's an extremely good performer. Of course, engines on their own aren't enough. To run steam engines, you need a variety of things. We've been discussing the engines, the workshop, the relationships, but you need a train. We acquired a train of carriages. They were second-hand, of course. HSBC Bank had these carriages they didn't want, and they said they would provide them to us. And they sold us a whole train for £1. So we had 16 carriages for the princely sum of £1. And I remember the day when Bob Meaney and I each put £0.50 into their pockets to buy the train. Of course, buying them is fine, but we've had to spend something of £100,000 on each carriage to get them up to scratch. So just pausing here for a minute, really, I think I've probably demonstrated we've done some amazing things, really. But up until this point, there wasn't really a strategy of 20-year vision, a plan. We were just going from hand to mouth, doing things, fortunately, in the right way, knowing the right people. But we hadn't taken no for an answer, and we still survived, having built all the relationships. So now we did start to think about, crikey, we've got this far. How are we going to make this organisation sustainable in the future? We'd built a workshop up which was making a profit doing contract work. All the charter trains we ran made a profit, but clearly you need even more money to repair these locomotives, so fundraising was going to be necessary. So we had a chat and we thought we could do one of three things. We thought we could simply say, it had been great fun, we'll just stop now while we're ahead, we'll just stop. That was one option. The second option was, we had great fun, we'll carry on in our lifetime, and probably think maybe in 10 years' time, it'll just become too difficult. Or we thought to ourselves, we could actually make a plan for the future. We may not know all the answers, but we could put a plan together, see what we needed, build the relationships, find the money, and see whether we can keep these locomotives running for the foreseeable future, which was a very hard ask because, you know, you don't necessarily know what's going to come across. You don't know about pandemics, you don't know about all sorts of things. But we decided in 20 minutes that we would take the hard road. And it has been a hard road. It is a hard road, but we still make a lot of good friends, and we still have enormous fun out of it. Although there are days when we certainly tear our hair, I can tell you. So we're into what's called a tipping point now, really, because there's only a handful of people now who can drive these locomotives who were trained to do so by British Railways, and they're all nearly 80 years old, and they're retiring. So the knowledge is disappearing at a very fast rate. And we think there's probably only 5 or 6 people who now have the engineering technical knowledge of the quality necessary to oversee the rebuilding of these locomotives to run at 75 miles an hour. Because the heritage railways run at 1/3 of that speed, and you don't need to have them in such fine order. I'm not saying the ones on heritage railways are in bad order, they're not. But when you're running at 75 miles an hour, these pieces of equipment are running at their full tilt utmost. They can't go any faster, really. So everything has to be completely perfect. And not only the locomotive drivers and engineers, you know, our stewards and people are getting older as well. Nostalgia had brought them here. And, you know, we got a painter here who does the Orient Express train repainting our engines, but you can see the age of these people. So we have to start teaching younger people. We now have in our own workshop an apprentice scheme. At the moment, we have 3 people at any one time. We train them. Some go on into industry, some stay with us. Our boiler smiths now were originally our apprentices. And we've built up a workshop of contract engineering, which now turns over £1 million a year. So it's a small business. You'll see in the background third-party engines. There's a hall there for the West Somerset Railway. The engine with 6880 on it is actually new. It's being made out of some parts and some new materials, but it's a new recreation. So we have moved from just repairing old engines and replacing some parts to actually making new parts. And there's lots of skills required in that, as you can imagine, from design, compliance, regulation, material content. So the next generation are learning basically how to run a business using old technology. And whilst they may all have their smartphones, some of the work they have to do is really very dirty and difficult. And this is just simply changing fire bars inside a firebox, but you have to get inside it to do that. So you have to have a certain aptitude of people who are prepared to do that sort of work. Everybody's welcome. We have a few ladies who help us out in various respects. We're open to all. Our workshop is now of national importance. The Institute of Mechanical Engineers awarded us a plaque as a centre of excellence and likened us to the E-Type Jaguar and Concorde. Basically, it's a cottage industry. There's no production lines anymore. We have to take every single project as an individual project and build it up from here. So, you know, we're putting new sides into fireboxes. That's Alistair Meanley, our new chief engineer, who's only 41 years old. So we're in good stead for a few years to come. But we are running on a fast railway. We're limited to 75 miles an hour. The railway we run on normally runs at 100 miles an hour. If you're more than 3 minutes late, you get fined. If you break down, there's no one coming to help you. There's no facilities and expertise anywhere you go. We have to take our coal, our water, and our tools, and our knowledge, and our experience, and our fitters with us wherever we go, which is a completely different way of thinking. And that means, you know, relationships at the top. So we have built relationships with the chairman of Network Rail and the regulators, and we ask them for their opinion. And they're very happy to support us, provided that we maintain the regulatory standards, engineering standards, and, you know, we keep things as simple as we possibly can. We're lucky in that our locomotives are designed to go fast. They are, if you like, the high-speed trains of their day, the high-speed trains of the 1930s. But even at 75 miles an hour, you know, they're slow compared with the modern high-speed trains, which are now going 125, 140 miles an hour. So that does require an awful lot of effort in planning, but by keeping friends with the Network Rail charter team, we're able to plan our routes so we can still run down to Devon, up to the north of England, to York, to the seaside, and to Oxford and places like that, and take passengers for journeys for the day out. And we do it because there's a thrill and a drama every time we go out. These locomotives, as you know, speak to you. They're the nearest thing you can be to a human being as a locomotive. They make noise. You can hear their effort. And even if you're not interested, you know, people look at these things and take lots of pictures with their iPhone. So they're very visible, which is good. And not only do we run down the Shakespeare line to Stratford, this is over the Settle and Carlisle and Shap Summit in Cumbria, under electrified wires on the West Coast main line to Glasgow, believe it or not. But you know, adopting the Great Western standardization does help. We have interchangeable parts. The design is the same. The principles are similar. So it makes some of our work easier. And we have tended to standardize on railway locomotives from this company because it has made our life a little bit easier. So coming to an end now, I've described everything that we've done. We have the locomotives, we have the carriages, we have the workshops, the maintenance depot, we have skilled people and good relationships. But one thing we didn't have was a license to run our own trains. We relied on our friends at West Coast Railway Company to run our trains for us, because jumping towards a license is a big undertaking. But for various reasons, one of them being that we wanted to secure train paths in the West Midlands, where the railway commuter services were getting busier and busier, would frankly squeeze us off the network if we didn't get our own paths. So we decided strategically we should form our own company to do this. And we had some friends who were able to produce all the regulatory consents and documentation of training and competencies. And we managed to convince a small team of people to work with us. But we had to raise some money. This is expensive stuff, you know. And we worked out we needed the amazing sum of £1 million to do this. So it was a bit of a gamble. Were we going to raise the money or not? But we spent some time spreading our vision around, our plan to keep these locomotives on the main line. We demonstrated that we were able to do that. The locomotives are in very good condition. They look nice. People want to travel behind them. Our trains are full. Our workshop is over full. We make a surplus. And we simply said in a very simple vision statement that we wanted to do two things. We wanted to run express steam trains, which says it all really, 3 words: express, steam and trains. And in our workshops, we were going to engineer a future. That's not just for the machinery, it's for the people as well. And we put out a share offer, which was a community benefit society, a quasi-public company charity, interesting form of organisation, which I think is worth further study in the UK. And we had no idea, really. We had the hope and expectation that we would raise some money. And within 18 months, we raised £1,150,000, which was an amazing sum of money. And we're very grateful to the 700 people who subscribed. But that enabled us to get our own license. So now we had everything that we needed to run our trains. Of course, we always need more money, more people, more everything, but we had all the component parts to be our own boss. So we now run our own trains. Luck and success still carry on. The National Railway Museum decided they couldn't restore and didn't want to keep this first-class Pullman car, Igor, and they gave it to us. We didn't have the money to restore it, but a television program sponsored its restoration. And here it is being recommissioned after being outshopped in our workshops. And this coach will be on our trains when we run after the virus. So we talked a lot about engines. This is what we do inside our train. You know, we're cooking the Great British Breakfast, serving it in first-class conditions. And you can travel on our train standard class if you want, or in Pullman luxury if you wish. And I have to say that our Pullman seats are usually sold out. We've started doing different things which are even more scary and more exciting, and I think the future will get larger and probably much more exciting, and it's definitely extremely scary. We took a franchise license from Warner Brothers to run the Polar Express, and this was a staggering, amazing success. We normally carry 10,000 people on our charter trains over 12 months. In December in 2018, we carried 25,000 people in 4 weeks. And we ran 4 trains a day, 4 days a week out of the middle of Birmingham in the evening with the Polar Express train ride film rights, with hiring actors. And we gained a whole new audience of people who knew nothing about steam trains, who had just come for an acting performance on the train. And that was £1 million turnover in 1 month, which made us sit up and think, really. So we've done it twice now. We weren't able to do it last year because of the pandemic, but we are proposing to bring more entertainment on our trains to widen the audience from just nostalgia. It's easy to say all that, but there's a lot of work going into it, as you can imagine. Running express steam trains in a suburban environment in the dark in December, when there's lots of commuter trains also running around you all the time. But it worked, it was planned well, and it was successful. Just about skin of our teeth, really. So we've got to know and develop.
Michael, we are running out of time.
I've got 3 slides left.
Okay.
So we've developed a relationship with the West Midlands Regional Executive to make the Shakespeare line the first heritage main line in the country. Here we have the Mayor launching the project at Moore Street Station. This line is 25 miles, 30 miles long from Birmingham to Stratford. Lots of stories along the way. We've got Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, Shakespeare's plays, of course, Henley and Arden, and Shakespeare at Stratford. And this is the railway where we now have a timetable paths to run regular trains, if we want, every day, but certainly at weekends. So this will be a major development in the future. Next year, we have the Commonwealth Games coming to Birmingham, where there'll be 1 million people coming just to tourism. So a huge opportunity to uplift the passenger carriage on our railway. And lastly, and I'll stop, just to give you an indication of the future, at some time in the future, the High Speed 2 will come to Birmingham from London, and it's going to come immediately adjacent to the Shakespeare line. You'll be able to come up from London in 45 minutes, take a 2-minute walk to our station and take our Shakespeare Express to Stratford. And in celebration for that, with a team of young pioneers, we are building a reproduction, the very first Pioneer high-speed train, which ran from London to Birmingham in 1860, which will be a working reproduction to showcase the industrial skills of the Midlands. So I'll stop there. Those are a few pointers for the future. Will we achieve them? Of course we will. Do we know how? Not necessarily. We'll build the friends and the business plans to get there in the same way as we've always done. Thank you very much for listening. I've enjoyed taking you on the journey. It's been nostalgic for me, and I hope it's been of interest to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's been a fascinating talk. I just wanted to ask, do you have a son who can carry on the tradition?
I have two sons. I do have 2 children, yes, but they'll have to fight for it. So we work on a meritocracy. So we need the best people to drive us forward. So we need a much wider than just the family now. We need lots of different families to help us.
Well, we have received a large number of comments. One is, I wish the Indian Railways would be equally sympathetic and flexible and enable private steam pulled and heritage diesel pulled rakes to be run on selected routes. There's another question. Why was that locomotive called Kolhapur? Do you have any idea?
Yes, well, in the 1930s, London Midland Scottish Railway built a new class of locomotives. It was the time of King George V Jubilee. He'd been on the throne for 50 years, and they named the class of engine after places in the British Empire. So there were several locomotives named after Indian places. There was one called India itself, various different, there's Hyderabad, Kolhapur. They just chose various places in the Commonwealth to name the engines. Kolhapur was an interesting choice, I think, and it was one of the very last Jubilees to survive.
And there are other comments, amazing high quality images, immaculate images, such neat livery and coach livery. Some of us are very disturbed by some of the livery that is given on Indian steam locomotives. So it's refreshing to see that the original color scheme is followed by your company.
Yes, thank you.
There's another query regarding the number of people who travel on the Stratford on Avon trip. Annually, how many people travel on the Stratford on Avon run?
Well, we run 2 return trains every operating day. At the moment, only Sundays in the summer. So we take about 400 people in one day. And the price, I think Simon asked a question, if you're buying a Sunday lunch, so you have a meal as well, then you're paying £75. If you're just taking yourself in a seat, it's £35. But those are quite cheap compared with most of the long haul excursions when you're paying between £120 and £250 for a seat. It's similar to prices for a football match or a good theatre show in London.
And the last comment, very little interest is shown in partnerships and by the private sector in getting involved in steams in India. I mean, what has been the secret in the United Kingdom that the private sector has got interested in this? One is your wonderful relationships, but what else?
I mean, there's been an enduring interest in steam locomotives in the private sector in the UK, and there have been some entrepreneurs and key people who've built relationships with the British Railways. And British Railways haven't been asked to put any money into the operation. In fact, people have made sure that British Railways receive money. You know, they receive part of the profits either by charges or shares of open days. So there's been a financial benefit to British Railways. And whilst, yes, there have been problems, there have been failures, there have been disappointments, there always are in any type of operation, generally it's been successful. And the private sector, I have to say, have been extraordinarily persuasive and not taken no for an answer.
Thank you, Michael. It's been a wonderful talk. I have enjoyed it, and I'm sure all the other 75 people who are watching, they have enjoyed it. So thank you once again for a wonderful experience of how you have built up this charitable trust and the various activities it does. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Vikas, would you like to put in anything now? Quiz?
No, I think we are very close to Mr. Lohani's presentation. So I think we should straight away go to Mayank and then start the next session.
Mayank?
Well, in that case, could I just request you to take this forward? Absolutely. So I think it's only fitting that Mr. Whitehouse and Mr. Lohani should be back to back. Pioneers both. So let me not get in the way, sir. And may I request you to just blend into the next session, sir.